Today, we're really going deep, exploring the concept of humility in bhakti, which is devotional service to Krishna, a central figure in Hinduism. And we're going to use a lecture by H. Rathanath Swami to help guide our exploration. So get ready, because we're going to unpack what genuine humility really looks like in this tradition and how it goes way beyond just outward appearances. It's a deep internal shift that's essential for spiritual growth, from what I understand.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And in bhakti, humility isn't just some optional virtue. It's really considered the foundation for the entire path. You can't really progress in your devotion to Krishna without it.
So it's not just like a nice add-on, it's like the key that unlocks everything.
Exactly. And Rananath Swami really emphasizes this. He uses the story of Arjuna's surrender to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Remember, how Arjuna is depicted. He's trembling, tears streaming down his face, completely desperate for Krishna's guidance. It's raw, genuine, not some performance of humility.
It's such a powerful contrast to someone who just wants to appear humble. Like, why is Arjuna's surrender so important?
Well, that complete surrender, that admission of, I don't know, please guide me, is exactly what opens him up to receiving the divine knowledge. It's a powerful lesson for all of us, really. The more we cling to our own limited understanding, the less space there is for true learning and growth.
It's like trying to pour more water into an already full cup. You got to empty it first to receive something new.
Exactly. And this principle isn't just in the Bhagavad Gita. It echoes throughout the history of bhakti. I mean, there are so many stories of these great figures whose actions just embodied this deep humility.
It makes me wonder, though, is there a danger in taking humility too far? Like, where's the line between being self-effacing and, well, maybe putting yourself down too much?
That's a really great question, and it's something we're going to be exploring as we get deeper into this. But for now, let's look at some of these figures whose actions spoke volumes about their humility. Like Maharaja Parikshit, for instance. He was Arjuna's grandson, royalty. But when he approaches the sage Shukadeva Goswami, he doesn't flaunt his status or act like he's got it all figured out.
So he basically comes as like a blank slate, totally open.
Exactly. He presents himself as like a fallen soul, just desperately seeking guidance. And this example highlights something crucial, I think. True humility isn't about outward appearances or social status. It's all about this genuine internal state.
So it's not about what you wear or the titles you hold. It's about how you approach the world, the people around you.
Precisely. And we see this even more with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who embraces the role of a fool before a spiritual master. He finds joy in admitting his limitations.
That's so different from our culture, which often prizes knowledge and expertise.
Right. And then there's this incredibly powerful image of Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. They were incredibly wealthy, learned ministers. But they approached Lord Chaitanya with straw in their teeth. It's this powerful symbol of defeat, a plea for mercy.
Wow, that's a really striking image. Like, what would drive someone to do that?
Their actions were a reflection of a deep inner state. And it's even more powerful when you consider that they took those ministerial roles not for themselves, but to protect the devotees. Their outward humility was really a manifestation of their self-service.
So there's a pattern emerging here. True humility isn't about saying the right words. It's about aligning your actions with your inner state. It shapes how you move through the world.
Yeah.
But Radhanath Swami also brings up another aspect of humility that I found really, honestly, kind of provocative. He compares the desire for honor and recognition to something, well, let's just say unpleasant.
Yeah, he uses that rather shocking analogy of boar stool. Not exactly pleasant dinner conversation, but it definitely gets your attention.
It does. He really wants us to examine, how much we crave validation, how much we crave praise. And he contrasts this craving with the mindset of true devotees. He talks about King Prithu, for example, who refused praise because he felt like he hadn't done anything to deserve it yet.
It highlights a key insight there, that true humility recognizes that ultimately our actions are inspired by a higher power, not by our own ego. It's about shifting the focus from self-promotion to service.
So instead of seeking praise for ourselves, we should be acknowledging that whatever we accomplish is due to Krishna's grace.
Exactly. And this idea is so beautifully illustrated in the story of Lord Chaitanya accepting harsh criticism without defending himself. Like he viewed it as guidance, a way to refine his practice.
So instead of getting defensive or trying to prove himself right, he saw criticism as an opportunity for growth.
Exactly. And then you have figures like Madhavendra Puri, who actively hid from honor and recognition. They understood that true fulfillment comes from serving that higher purpose, not from, stroking our own egos.
Their actions really challenge us to question our own motivations. Are we seeking to build ourselves up, or are we actually seeking to serve something greater? And this is where I think Radhanath Swami's analogy, as shocking as it might be, forces us to really confront those desires.
Absolutely. It makes us examine those often unconscious desires for validation, that we all carry. It's such a stark contrast to the devotee's focus on selfless service to Krishna.
And speaking of service, Radhanath Swami talks about how important menial service is as a hallmark of true humility in bhakti. It's about recognizing that no act of service is beneath us when it's done with love and devotion.
And he shares some pretty incredible stories to, illustrate this point. Like, think about Lord Chaitanya, for example. Here's an incarnation of God, and he's joyfully cooking, cleaning, massaging his guru's feet, even washing the clothes of his devotees.
Wow, it's like he reversed the whole power dynamic. Instead of expecting service as a divine being, he took on the role of a servant.
Exactly. And it wasn't just for show. His actions were a true reflection of his inner state. Take King Prataparudra, for example, sweeping the streets during Ratha Yatra. This wasn't for a photo op. It revealed his heart, his true identity as a servant.
So it's a powerful reminder that true humility isn't about putting on a show, it's something that comes from within.
Right. And when we talk about outward expressions of humility, there's that wonderful story about Rupa and Sanatana. Remember, they used their wealth to build a grand hall for philosophical discussion, but they didn't stop there. They personally served their guests, demonstrating genuine humility, alongside their opulence.
It's like the saying, actions speak louder than words. They could have easily just funded the hall and bask in the prestige, but they chose to serve.
Exactly. And this highlights a key point about menial service, I think. It's not about the task itself, but the consciousness with which we perform it. It's about seeing every act of service as an opportunity to express our devotion to Krishna.
So whether it's cleaning a temple or cooking for others or even offering a kind word, it's the intention behind it that really matters.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the story of Jiva Goswami, a figure known for his vast scholarship. Yet he found his greatest fulfillment in serving his guru, Rupa Goswami, in the humblest of ways.
It seems like the more these great souls understood Krishna's greatness, the more their own accomplishments seemed, I don't know, less important, leading them to embrace service even more. But there's also this kind of fascinating paradox. Radhanath Swami brings up the idea of seeing ourselves as the most fallen, even as we progress on the spiritual path.
It really challenges our conventional understanding of what it means to grow spiritually, right? You'd think that growth would come with a sense of accomplishment, maybe even some pride. But in bhakti, the opposite seems to be true.
So the more we advance, the more we recognize our shortcomings and our need for Krishna's grace.
Precisely. And this recognition isn't about putting ourselves down or, negativity. It's about acknowledging our dependence on Krishna, understanding that we're always in need of his guidance and mercy.
And we see this in the lives of these devotees who, despite their realizations, never lost sight of their own limitations. Like Radhanath Swami tells this incredible story about Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. He was the author of Chaitanya Charitamrita, like one of the most important texts in bhakti. But even though he was chosen for this huge task, a task that would, make him super famous, he saw himself as completely unworthy.
Yeah, it's striking. He even said that anyone who just heard his name would lose all their spiritual merit.
Wow. It's a level of humility that's hard to even grasp, especially in our culture, where we celebrate achievement and recognition so much. But I think it really speaks to his devotion, his understanding that true greatness is about serving Krishna, not looking for glory for yourself.
It's a good reminder for all of us, really. No matter how far we progress on the path, we need to watch out for that ego creeping in. It's about cultivating that childlike humility, the kind that allows Krishna's love to flow through us without any obstruction.
So it's like a constant process of refinement, a journey of letting go of our ego's desires and surrendering to Krishna's will. But I guess also finding that balance between recognizing our limitations and still appreciating the unique gifts that we have to offer.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Humility isn't about denying our talents or abilities. It's about recognizing that they're ultimately gifts from Krishna, meant to be used in his service.
Like we're instruments in an orchestra. Each one has its own unique sound, but they all play together in harmony to create something beautiful.
That's a beautiful analogy. And, the conductor of that orchestra is Krishna, guiding and inspiring us to play our part the best we can.
So, how do we actually cultivate this kind of humility in our daily lives? It can feel kind of like a lofty ideal.
It might seem daunting, but honestly, it starts with the small, everyday choices. How do we react when someone criticizes us? Do we get all defensive, or do we see it as a chance to learn and grow?
Yep, that's a good point. It's easy to talk about humility in theory, but it's those tough moments where our true nature really comes out.
Exactly. And how do we treat people that we might see as beneath us? Do we see them as equals, worthy of respect and kindness, or does our ego create that sense of separation?
It's about remembering that everyone, no matter what their status or outward accomplishments are, is a soul on a journey back to Krishna.
Absolutely. And even in how we approach our work or our creative endeavors, are we motivated by wanting to serve or by wanting recognition and praise?
It's about really asking ourselves, why am I doing this? And being honest about our motivations. It's easy to get caught up in wanting fame or success.
And this is where the teachings of these great devotees are so inspiring. They remind us that true fulfillment comes from aligning our actions with Krishna's will, using our gifts to serve a higher purpose.
So, to bring this back to menial service, it seems like it's not just about the task, but about the consciousness behind it, seeing every action, even if it seems small, as a chance to express our love for Krishna.
Exactly. And Radhanath Swami really drives this point home with these inspiring stories.
Yeah.
He talks about Lord Chaitanya again, who found so much joy in doing even the most humble services for his devotees, like washing their clothes or bringing them water.
It's like he saw those acts as, I don't know, love letters to Krishna expressed through serving others.
Beautiful way to put it. And then there's the story of King Krataparudra, who humbly swept the streets during the Ratha Yatra festival. It was an act that revealed his true identity as a servant, not a ruler.
And Lord Chaitanya recognized this sincerity, his lack of ego, and showered him with mercy. It's a reminder that true humility isn't about appearances, it's about the state of our heart.
Absolutely. And speaking of actions that reveal the heart, there's the story of Rupa and Sanatana again. They didn't hold on to their wealth and prestige. They used it to create a space for spiritual learning, and then humbled themselves as servants to their guests, even the least important ones.
It's such a powerful example of how humility can exist alongside material abundance. It's not about renouncing the world, it's about renouncing the ego's attachment to those things.
Exactly. And their example shows us that true wealth is about our connection to Krishna, not about material possessions.
It's not about rejecting what we have, it's about using it to serve a higher purpose.
And speaking of serving a higher purpose, Ratanath Swami tells this story about Jiva Goswami, who was this brilliant scholar, but found his greatest fulfillment in serving his guru, Rupa Goswami, in the simplest, most menial ways.
It's so inspiring to think about this renowned scholar humbly massaging his guru's feet, cleaning his things, preparing palm leaves for him to write on. It really challenges how we think about success and achievement.
And there's this moment where Jiva Goswami, wanting to defend his guru's honor, gets chastised for his pride. It's a good reminder that even in our service, we need to be careful that our ego doesn't take over.
So it's about finding that balance between striving for excellence in our service, but making sure our ego doesn't creep in and take over.
It's this ongoing process of purification, a journey of refining our motivations and surrendering to that higher purpose. And this is beautifully illustrated in the story of Narottam Das Thakur, who secretly served his guru, Lokanath Goswami, in the humblest, most unnoticed ways.
That story is really moving. Imagine being a prince, a scholar, and choosing to clean the place where your guru relieved himself without anyone knowing.
And he wasn't doing it for praise or recognition or anything. It was pure love and devotion, wanting to serve without expecting anything in return.
And when Lokanath Goswami finally discovered what Narottam Das was doing, it really touched his heart. He recognized the depth of his disciples' devotion.
It's a beautiful example of how genuine humility, even when it's hidden from the world, can touch hearts and inspire change. And it brings us back to that question we've been exploring. How can we cultivate this kind of selfless service in our own lives?
It's a question that really hits home when we think about Srila Prabhupada, who brought the teachings of bhakti to the West with so much humility.
His life was such a powerful testament to that, wasn't it? Leaving the spiritual sanctuary of Vrindavan to come to New York City, where he cooked, cleaned, and cared for his early disciples while sharing the teachings of Krishna.
I remember reading about how he would personally shop for groceries, cook for his disciples, even clean up after them.
And he didn't stop doing these things, even as his movement grew. There's that story about him cleaning the temple in the Bowery even in his 70s.
He understood that true leadership isn't about having power over others. It's about empowering others through service. And it wasn't just about the actions, but his internal state, his constant awareness of his dependence on Krishna's grace. He often said, "I am a humble servant of my spiritual master."
Yeah, it's a reminder that humility isn't about putting ourselves down. It's about recognizing where we fit in the grand scheme of things. We're all instruments in Krishna's hands, meant to be used for his purpose.
So we've seen how humility shows up in our willingness to surrender, our freedom from wanting honor, our embracing of service, and recognizing our own limitations.
And it all points to one thing. True humility in bhakti isn't about putting on a show. It's about a deep inner change that touches every part of our lives.
But here's a question to ponder. How can we cultivate this genuine humility in our own lives, even in the smallest interactions?
How do we shift from wanting validation to offering service? From clinging to our ego to surrendering to something bigger?
It's a challenge, but I think it's one worth taking on.
Yeah, it's like we're being asked to completely flip our usual way of thinking.
Mm.
Instead of trying to be somebody, we're being challenged to become nobody so that Krishna can be everything. That's it. Shifting the focus from promoting ourselves to, like, getting out of the way. Realizing that real fulfillment comes from serving Krishna, not from feeding our egos.
And this whole idea of feeling unworthy, even as we're growing spiritually, it's so interesting. It's not about putting ourselves down, right? It's more about understanding how massive Krishna's love and grace really are, how our efforts will always be tiny compared to that.
It's about approaching our practice with humility. We
Yeah.
always need Krishna's guidance and mercy.
And we see this over and over in the lives of the great devotees. They never forgot their limitations, even with all their deep spiritual understanding. Radhanath Swami tells this amazing story about Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, the one who wrote Chaitanya Charitamrita. Even though he wrote this monumental work, he considered himself lower than worms.
Imagine that. He was entrusted with sharing the life and teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which would make him so famous. But he still saw himself as completely unworthy.
He even said that anyone who just heard his name would lose all their spiritual progress. Talk about serious humility.
It's almost mind-boggling, isn't it? Yeah. But it shows the depth of his devotion. He knew true greatness was about serving Krishna, not about getting glory for himself.
It's such a good reminder for us. Even as we progress, we got to watch out for that ego sneaking in, always aiming for that humble attitude, the kind that lets Krishna's love flow through us.
It's like we're clearing a path for his grace, getting rid of anything our ego might put in the way.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into humility and bhakti, we're left with more than just information. We have this challenge in front of us. How can we cultivate this radical humility in our own lives?
It's not about making grand gestures or showy displays.
Right.
It's those small, everyday choices we make. How do we react to criticism? Do we see the people we think are beneath us as equals? Do we crave attention or quietly offer our service?
That's a good point. Bhakti's not about becoming someone special. It's about becoming an instrument of Krishna's love. We're like vessels for his grace to flow into the world.
And that journey starts with humility. Recognizing we depend on Krishna and surrendering our egos to his will. It's a step that can take us to incredible spiritual heights.
So as you go about your day, remember those great devotees. Remember their humility, their selflessness, their devotion. And ask yourself, how can I live those qualities, even in small ways? Because it's in those little acts of humility, those moments of surrender, that we unlock the real treasures of bhakti.
Absolutely. And that's a journey worth taking.